Good morning, everyone. My name is Kim Kluge, as he mentioned, and I'm here to replace Micah Van Veltzen. We both work at Philips, and she's a director of intellectual property, and I'm an IP counsel. So she asked if I could quickly replace her at this event the last 2 days. So this talk is just going to be 10 minutes, very quick, and just to kind of whet your appetite for IP issues when you're an SME or you're a venture and you have breakthrough technology. So of course, many of you have probably seen this funnel in the past. It has to do, it's a good way to explain intellectual property issues and SMEs and for new ventures. So you have the front end of the funnel, of course, and the development and commercialization. And the landscape where ventures and early stage researchers operate has changed over the years, and it's become a very dynamic environment, and where ventures can be spun out, and you have startups and IP insourcing in companies such as Philips, and you also oftentimes SMEs also have alliances as they go along, and IP licensing as they mature. You hope to have IP licensing out, sometimes IP licensing in, and acquisitions as well. That can be one way for commercialization is larger companies can acquire you and help you do your sales and marketing. Okay, a lot of times SMEs, when they're starting out, they will, and as they go through this funnel, they'll get collaborators to join them, and you end up with joint intellectual property and joint R&D that gets developed. And this, of course, you have to decide, probably very early on, you need to decide who's going to own the IP and how's it going to be operated as time goes on, and who's going to leverage it when you get closer to the marketplace and items like that. So it's important early on to get that relationship hammered out in contracts. So creating value by early technology. Okay, these are Micah's slides, and I found as I was going through them, I agree with a lot of what she was saying, very much so. For SMEs and small ventures, you want to have a balanced portfolio. You want to be sure and try to get patent applications and claims that will cover your devices as well as your processes in using the devices and also methods of manufacturing. And that's probably what Micah meant by covering all of the valuable parts of the value chain. Okay, you want to have a size that's reasonable in view of the investments and costs. And this other criteria here, based on conscious decision when to file, that can be really important. I had a question about that yesterday. It seems to be a real dilemma for small companies. I don't want to file too early because I don't think that my patent application is fleshed out enough, and there's still data that I want to add later. And then you can file a little bit too late where you actually risk your patentability. More so in Europe than in the US. In Europe, you have to have absolute novelty. In the US, you have a 1-year grace period as long as you can show that you were the first inventor. But that's a whole other story. So you want to leverage your IP position. That's also important as an SME. You're starting out, and it's hard to do everything you need to do, but one of the things you want to try to do is have a good IP position so that you can use it in your negotiations with a venture capitalist. Oh, and of course, Micah recommended to be realistic about the value of your IP, because she's seen this, and I know I've seen it too in my lifetime or my career, that oftentimes people think that their inventions and their IP is maybe a little bit more valuable than what they really can get in the marketplace and what it's worth. So it just creates unreasonable expectations oftentimes when you're negotiating with venture capitalists or negotiating for licensing and things like that. So I think she's right when she says, be realistic about the value. Okay, so implications for external IP landscape. I think she's right about this top thing as far as sharing knowledge and continuously times in the lifetime of IP, and that your IP portfolio hopefully will change over time. Obviously, you may add improvements, and you may also file divisional applications. And as I said just a few moments earlier, you'll also want to capture in your claims things about methods and methods of manufacturing, as well as your devices. I really liked her next point when I was looking over these slides. She's absolutely right. If there's any mistake that I've seen as an IP counsel in the US, in particular for small businesses over there, you really do need a concise portfolio. And what I've seen over, at least in the US, is that sometimes when these entrepreneurs, bless their heart, but they are using other people's money, and they can oftentimes file more patent applications than what they need, or they can end up going into countries that they don't need. And a concise portfolio is the thing that you want to achieve, because you don't want to end up running out of money prematurely. And if your exit strategy is to be bought out by a larger company, the Philipses of the world, we're not really looking that you went into some of these smaller countries, because you have to keep in mind what the market would have been in that country for your product. But yeah, we're not looking that you've gone all over the world and say, oh, that's great. We're really looking more for a concise portfolio, because it shows what you know what you're doing. This is also important. Ownership needs to be clear and laid down very early. License agreements, we look for that. And as she mentions earlier in her slides, you want to cover all the stages, as well as, the methods of manufacturing and the devices and so on. So, and of course, I saw this a lot in the US as well, and I'm listening in the last 2 days, and I see that it's very important over here too. You're going to look for partnerships early on, and it's certainly one exit strategy when you're an SME is to look for partners, either to help you get your product to the market, or maybe your exit strategy is to sell your technology. Okay, so I think we mentioned this as well. Value-adding activities for an SME and a venture. I think I might have mentioned this a few minutes ago. One of the things, next generation IP, you have to think about divisional applications and improvement patents. Those are very important as well. Large companies love to see that kind of thing if you really have, well, not only concise like the last slide said, but comprehensive coverage of your technology. Of course, grant of the US patents as well as other jurisdictions are great. Whenever, sometimes I have to even sell portfolios within Philips, and I always feel much more confident when the portfolio I'm going to sell has not only US patents, but other patents as well from other countries. So obviously, if you're an SME and you're going along and you're developing your technology, one of the best things you can hope for is positive clinical trials and regulatory approval. Those kinds of things certainly help you to attract the attention of venture capitalists and other types of investors. And for biomarkers, obviously, you want to be able to validate their use. That'll add value to your IP and your technology. And working prototypes, that's also very good. So companies such as Philips will be looking for things like these very specific steps in the development of your technology. Okay, I thought this was a very good slide as well. When I was practicing in the US and probably here as well, because you've got, as an SME, you have so many things on your mind, you might not realize different types of agreements you can have in leveraging your IP. So you can do upfront payment, you can receive upfront payments and milestone-based payments. So maybe a large company, if that's your exit strategy, maybe they'll give you a large, shouldn't say that, I work for Philips, a small chunk of money for a positive clinical trial outcome, would be one milestone. Regulatory approval is another one. Say another milestone can be a certain amount of money that you've reached in selling your product. Another combination, another type of agreement you may want to negotiate with the company would be oftentimes large companies might not want to pay a large upfront fee because then that increases the risk for them on a product or a technology that's not yet quite proven. So that's where I like this second option here. And it might be the combination of an upfront fee that's kind of small, but then where that SME can pick up maybe a little bit more money later on because they feel that their technology is really worth something. I mean, really worth more than what they might feel they're getting from the upfront fee. You've got royalties that you can try to negotiate. And I like that second option that she has on her slides because it really creates an environment where you can come up with a nice creative agreement between the parties. So, and then the third option is a lump sum payment for just, you know, say your exit strategy is just to develop the IP and the product to a certain level, and then you just want to leave and go on to the next SME or whatever. Lump sum payment for the IP is another option. Okay, so the recommendations and conclusions. You have to obviously start at the beginning and try to create value from your IP from the very beginning. If I can just mention again a little bit from my experience in the US, sometimes these SMEs, they'll wait to file applications because it is, I know it's expensive, but try to do it as soon as you can. And sometimes you'll even do it when you're still a professor or something in a college or a university. Try to work with your tech transfer office to create patent applications. This is also important. Sometimes I saw mistakes in the United States for people not quite understanding intellectual property before they started an SME, and it can get you into some hot water and create problems for you later. So try to do that, even though I know you have many other things you're juggling at the same time when you are trying to develop a technology. Invest in new inventions and R&D. I agree with these slides, but I would say that number 3 is perfectly understandable if you're not able to do that until you're a little bit older. I mean, typically I don't think an SME has a whole lot of funds set aside maybe for R&D at the beginning, but you never know. It depends on what kind of funding they were able to get. And select experts regularly to review. I think that's a really important point to make. And I was thinking about it this morning. I would say not only IP, but in my experience in the US, if you're an SME, try to get regulatory people, IP people, funding people, yeah, all of the consultants that you can think of to really help yourself not to make too many mistakes, that you look back years later and say, wow, I really spent way too much money. I wish I would have known this earlier. And that's where the consultants can come in, because you can just hire them for projects and then let them go, and you don't have to have a full-time employee that's, in the beginning at least, for some of these other things like financial and regulatory and IP. And then, of course, Micah mentions again to be realistic in your expectations of your IP value. It helps you to negotiate better, I think. That's been my experience. When these small enterprises in the US, sometimes if they overvalue their IP, and a company comes along and says, well, we're willing to give you this and that, and they say, no, it's worth a lot more, I'm not going to do that. And so then the deal falls apart, and the big guy goes away, and then he's kind of left, the SME's kind of left to fend for themselves for maybe another several years, or 2 or 3 years, and it can be very difficult. So it's good to be reasonable. Okay, thank you.